Hello and welcome to Considering and Catching Up on Cannabis Science, Opportunities and Implication for Prevention. My name is Melissa Tomasic, and I work at the Penn State Prevention Research Center. I'm the project director of REACH, which provides support and resources to rural communities and stakeholders in Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia to address substance misuse disorder and mental health disorder prevention, treatment, and recovery. A central part of our project is to provide a series of monthly live webinars focused on the needs of our communities. So thank you for being here. So before we get started, I wanted to mention a couple of housekeeping items. After we hear from Dr. Kilmer, we'll drop a short survey in the chat. And I want to thank you in advance. We really appreciate your help collecting information for the future and making these webinars the best that they can be. And Dr. Kilmer will address questions at the end of the webinar. So please put any questions or comments into the chat throughout the presentation. So without further ado, I am pleased to introduce our presenter today. Dr. Jason Kilmer is an associate professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the University of Washington School of Medicine and an adjunct associate professor in psychology at the University of Washington. Now, let's see here. Hold on one second. Okay. All right. Jason serves as an investigator on several studies evaluating prevention and intervention efforts for alcohol, cannabis, and other drug use by college students. So today, Dr. Kilmer will review what prevention and treatment professionals need to know about cannabis in 2024, including ways in which the use of cannabis can contribute to academic outcomes and mental health issues. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Kilmer, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Melissa, you've been so great to work with, and I appreciate the chance to do this today. Hey, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, as you call it. I'm going to dive right into this. Know that I have a lot of slides, and the second we're done, I'll send a PDF of my handouts to Melissa, so if that helps with your note-taking, know that that's coming. Big thanks to Dr. Welsh for the initial invitation. Melissa, again, you've been amazing. Thank you for everything you did to make this happen. And thanks to all of you for making time during your lunch hour to hear about this. I also want to thank Zoom. We couldn't do this without Zoom. Plus, Zoom is gaining emotional intelligence. It's gaining empathy. You wouldn't think that's true, but it's true. I started seeing it for the first time in spring of 2021 when I was asked to present for the state of Louisiana. And when they sent me my Zoom link, the Zoom link actually said, which is how I feel all the time. I was like, wow, Zoom, you get me. And now everywhere I look, here's what Melissa sent me. It was like a double one. It was a little baby one that went, and then into the full, So literally Zoom is one of only 5 friends I have at this point. So thanks, Zoom. When we talk about cannabis use, we're very mindful of the language. I live in a state in which we've had legal cannabis over 11 years. And when Initiative 502 was passed, it was, and I quote, the recreational marijuana initiative. We stopped saying recreational a few years ago. We tend to talk more about non-medical use because we don't talk about recreational alcohol use. When you think recreation, you think hiking, biking, fishing, things like that. There's also pretty clear historical documentation that the term marijuana has been used for not great purposes against certain groups of people in some fairly racist ways. So the state even passed legislation that says if you talk about cannabis at the state level, that's the term we need to use. What we've learned is how many high school students, college students, other people don't know what that word means. I worked in a student life office where we screened people for cannabis use. People would say no, but then with nothing to hide, say, I use weed every day. And we're like, hold up, you said you don't use cannabis. They're like, I don't know what that is. So at the end of the day, use the word that the human being across from you uses, but definitely know that there's been a shift toward cannabis. And if you need to clarify that, you can say, and when I say cannabis, I mean marijuana, weed, whatever terms people use. The other thing is that the verb has changed a lot. 10 years ago, most screening measures said, do you smoke marijuana or have you smoked marijuana? If someone uses edibles every day, they can say nope. And they're not lying. We missed their daily use. So there are many routes of use. It can be smoked in joints, bongs, pipes, blunts, spliffs. There are vape cartridges for use in vape devices, vaporizers, vape pens. It can be orally ingested, cookies, gummies, brownies, in quotes, edibles, as well as brewed as a tea or infused drinks. There are also concentrates, very high potency products. Dabbing has become a verb for hitting dabs. Hash oil, wax, butter, shatter. If smoked or vaped, people feel it pretty immediately. If it's orally ingested, there's more of a lag. In the published literature, 30 to 60 minutes, but some retail stores warn of the potential for a 2-hour lag. When we look at norms, what's really, really important to understand is decades of research show that if someone genuinely believes, quote, everyone does this, they're probably going to start. They want to fit in. And if someone genuinely believes everyone does this and is considering stopping, why would I stop? Like, I'll be the only one not using. When you can correct a misperceived norm, it can have an impact on people's behavior. These are data from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's National Survey on Drug Use and Health. And they look at past year cannabis use by 3 different age groups. So first, 3 things to conclude from this slide. First is that I'd like to thank SAMHSA for putting me in an age group with 26-year-olds. Thanks, SAMHSA. You're my favorite federal agency. Second, most people don't use. That's very, very, very clear. 90% of 12 to 17-year-olds don't use. 2/3 of 18 to 25-year-olds don't use. 83% of people in my age group, 26 and older, don't use. But there is this group of 18 to 25-year-olds, and this is the third point, that if a group tends to use more frequently, this is the group. I won't spend a ton of time going through data other than to just hopefully visually show the point that most people aren't using. My friend and colleague, Dr. Jeff Linkenbach, always says we want to balance hope and concern. It's concerning that 20% of high school seniors report past 30-day use of cannabis. It's hopeful that 80% don't. But I want you to see if you're working with kids that are like, all your stats are wrong, everyone uses. They really, really, really don't. College students are the group that in 18 to 25-year-old, you do tend to see more prevention focused on. When you look at past year use of college students, it's 41%, meaning most don't use. If you look at their non-college young adult peers, 1 to 4 years beyond high school, past year use and past 30-day use are very comparable. The only statistically significant difference is that daily or almost daily use is 3 times higher in that group of non-college young adults. Sandra Wolfson is a researcher that showed that the most significant misperceptions of cannabis use come from those that use most frequently. The people that use in that daily or almost daily genuinely believe most people use and/or most people use heavily. Perceived norms keep going up, but what we find is we keep hearing it's just weed, it's natural, it's safer than alcohol, even though the science tells a very different story. I was a co-author on a paper that Mike Gilson published that showed that using data from our young adult health survey of 18 to 25-year-olds, over time, perceived risk of cannabis use, whether that's physical or psychological or emotional, and whether that's occasional or regular, just keeps going down. Alcohol, perceived risk of 2 drinks every day is going up. The only thing that's not changed is perceived physical and psychological risk of 5 or more drinks every weekend. That has always been high, and it has stayed high. Yet the science tells a very different story. I used to say research has to catch up on what people are using. Research is caught up, and we can genuinely say that. If you orient the brain, such the front of the brain's on the left, back of the brain's on the right, you can see lots of very important functions associated with different parts of the brain. Drugs that involve a high, you tend to see activity in the reward pathway of the brain that I'm hovering over right now. The most well-studied cannabinoid in cannabis is THC. That's what causes the high. CBD research with human beings is in distant second place. Other cannabinoids are virtually unstudied among us as people, outside of animal models. Where does THC bind in the brain? All over the place. I can't graphically show you a high any better than showing you that THC binds in the reward pathway of the brain. When I was in high school, people would say that marijuana causes, quote, a motivational syndrome. Want to make something sound scary? Call it a syndrome, and then go dun, dun, dun. Motivation's hard to measure, but what regulates motivation? The anterior cingulate cortex, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Don't worry about the fancy terminology. Where's that in the brain? Right there. So when people say, when I use weed, I feel like my motivation goes down, is that possible? Absolutely. Now, what do researchers consider the strong stuff? High-potency cannabis, anything over 10% THC. This becomes so important to understand because I'm so confident that lots of people are operating off of a very old script, and I'll tell you why. El Soli and colleagues in 2016 published an article that looked at 2 decades of drug seizures by the DEA. And if you package this article with Dr. Nora Volkov's 2014 article, we can estimate cannabis potency going back to the 1970s. When you hear people who are older today reflecting on their time in the 70s, and they say that they, in quotes, smoked grass, it's because it was practically grass. 1% THC, 1.5% THC. In the 80s, 2 to 3% THC. May all of your retirement portfolios grow like this. In 95, 4%. By 2001, 6%. By 2006, 8%. We've been double digits in the illicit market since 2010. But then the chart runs out. In 2021, they updated it. And they said, in that threshold of high potency cannabis in the illicit market, it's been above that 10% threshold on average since 2010. But what about states that have legalized? Washington went under the microscope, and they looked at the first 2+ years of sales in my state. You need to know that this doesn't count concentrates, this doesn't count edibles, this is smokable flower only. On the y-axis going up and down is the percentage of total tax-inclusive sales. On the x-axis going left to right is month and year. What's that little baby blue sliver right there? Products with THC under 10%. That's it. It's been virtually eliminated from the retail market. And everything else is high-potency cannabis. In brick red, it's 10 to 15. Green is 15 to 20. Purple is over 20%. Cash and colleagues eliminated any doubt when they looked at medical and non-medical programs in the United States. Colorado, 95.91% of their retail market is high-potency cannabis. California is only 0.01%. Colorado legalized for non-medical purposes. California did the same, but kept medical dispensaries open. The visible difference with California is the larger slice of the pie, or pizza as it may be, yum, is 10 to 15%, but still above that 10% threshold. In New England, you see a very consistent trend. Everything in yellow and green is high-potency cannabis. My state clocked in at the highest with 97%. When people say, well, I used when I was younger and I turned out fine, they used different stuff. When people say it's natural, it's just weed, I hope what's clear is that it stopped being just weed a long time ago. When people say it's natural, in my state, smokable bud or flower averages 20 to 30% THC. None of that occurs in nature. That takes intentional breeding of created high-potency strains. Hash oils, concentrates, what people use for dabbing, 60 to 90%. Not only does that not occur in nature, that's not even the plant anymore. And why potency matters, as evidenced by this slide that says why potency matters. Good slide, Jason. DeForty and colleagues showed across 11 cities in Europe and Brazil that daily use of cannabis over 10% THC increased the odds of developing a psychotic disorder, not an acute flare-up, not an acute toxic psychosis, not something that went away when the substance wore off. The odds of developing a psychotic disorder with daily use, 5 to 6 times greater than people who don't use it all. Think of all we're doing about mental health in our communities, especially after the pandemic, and increased access to these high-potency products is happening in a lot of places. At the start of the pandemic, Hines and colleagues showed out of the United Kingdom that following people through adolescence to the age of 24, the more often they used products over 10% THC, the more likely they were to be addicted, cannabis use disorder, and the more onset of generalized anxiety disorder. In Canada, which legalized nationwide, they made very clear, it's legal, that doesn't mean it's safe. And people need to know that for concentrates across the board, more problematic cannabis use, more addiction, cannabis use disorder, and more mental health disorders. Finally, I'm a state employee. I work at a public school. We are reminded, especially at election season, it's a state ethics violation to come out for or against a candidate or an initiative. So we tend to be very quiet and speak when spoken to. We got spoken to at the end of 2019, start of 2020. The state said something feels like it's changed in Washington. We want researchers to weigh in on these high potency products. We don't want any one person to do that. It's way too easy to dismiss that person's conclusions as bias. We don't even want one university to do it. What if they just handpick people that play nicely together? So they almost jokingly said, the University of Washington, Washington State University, you're rivals. You don't agree on anything. What if we invite researchers from both schools? And only if you can all agree on what goes in this, will it ever see the light of day. I was honored to be one of the researchers, and I was struck by how quickly we did come up with a consensus statement that everyone signed off on. You can go to this website, which will be in your handouts, Download the full 20-page report. If you don't have time to read 20 pages, I'm with you. We have a 2-page Cliff Notes version. Cliff was my favorite author when I was younger, so shout out to Cliff. There's even slides you can download. And what we concluded is that these high-potency products are no joke at all, especially before the age of 25. Adolescents, teenagers, college students, young adults, the more often they use these high-potency products, the more they're experiencing across the board a range of unwanted outcomes, including the risk of developing a cannabis use disorder or addiction. So I tried to pick 5 domains or outcomes particularly relevant to prevention. I feel like I should pause, especially if someone at the end is like, could you go back to that first slide? Before I continue, what clarifying questions do people have? Or what comments or questions do people have on this last piece? Nothing in the chat. If that comes up, I'll come back to it. So, oh, something did come through. Can you post that link? Oh, it's going to be in the handouts you get. While I'm presenting, I don't know how to post it, but that'll be in the handouts that you get. All right, so impact on attention, concentration, and memory. If I could pick one slide to show to college students, I would probably pick this, honestly. In some ways, it's the most long-standing findings that we have. The part of the brain that, among other things, affects attention, concentration, and memory is the hippocampus. Truly long story short, after cannabis use, the neurons in the hippocampus get suppressed. They fire, but they fire at a rate that is lower and slower than they could or should be firing. Harrison Pope is a Harvard scientist who said, I want to test this, but I don't want to have people get crazy high and make them take a test. That's not good research. I want people to use cannabis, and I want to test them a full day later, 24 hours later. Dr. Pope showed that 24 hours after cannabis use, there were measurable decreases in attention, concentration, and memory. And the more frequently people used, the more pronounced these decreases were. There seemed to be an additive or cumulative effect. Researchers said, that's a game changer. Critics said, is it? It's not causal. What if people who struggle with attention happen to be attracted to cannabis use? You can't conclude one causes the other. So Dr. Pope said, that's fair. And ethically, we can test that. We can't take people who don't use and make them start because that's unethical. But what if we have people that are using every day and have them quit? If we follow them over time and as they abstain, their cognitive abilities stay the same, maybe they were there to start with. But if as they abstain, their cognitive abilities improve, that, my friends, is causal. It takes 4 weeks, 28 days, but 28 days after stopping daily cannabis use, this all goes away compared to a control group of people who don't use it all. Susan Tapert, my former classmate, was senior author on a paper out of San Diego, where they said, forget daily use and forget adults. What if we look at 15 to 19-year-olds who use on average every other day? They showed that verbal learning took 2 weeks of abstinence to match that of their peers who don't use. Verbal working memory takes 3 weeks of abstinence. Attention takes the full 4 weeks. Think of what this means. If you're working with kids in the community or a client that says, I have ADHD, that's been diagnosed, I'm prescribed something for it, we can look them in the eye and say, cannabis is a terrible fit because we know of no substance more associated with causing attention decreases, let alone worsening existing ones. Sometimes I hear them go, nah, I think you're wrong, because when I don't use, I can't sit still. That's withdrawal. And I'm going to talk about that in a bit. Second, if someone's like, yeah, I wonder if I have ADHD, can I have Adderall? And they're using cannabis, how can we pretend to diagnose if they have an attention issue or not, if they're using a substance that causes attention decreases? And finally, if someone says, I want to do well in school, but I can't focus, I can't concentrate, my memory's not good, and they're using cannabis, stopping that use will pay dividends on those cognitive abilities. The science shows it matters. Think about that largely virtual year that we had, where the narrative was, we've got to get kids back in school. We all need to be champions for student success. We can all get behind that. I'm going to make the case that if you're all about student success, you should also be all about alcohol and other drug prevention, because what we do about substance use will pay dividends in the classroom. DuPont and colleagues out in Maryland, shout out to Maryland and the Maryland participants. One of my favorite people in this field and on planet Earth is Amelia Aria, who is senior author on this paper. They looked at K through 12 and showed that of all the problems that continue to dropping out, substance use is one we can actually identify and do something about. And when adolescents stop using substances, they do better in school. Students who use substances are at increased risk for academic failure, including dropping out. And while both alcohol and cannabis matter, cannabis has a stronger negative relationship, meaning as cannabis use goes up, these outcomes go down. Stronger negative relationship to grade point average, other outcomes, and risk for dropout than alcohol does. The more severe the substance use, the more likely impact on academic performance and risk for dropout. It doesn't go away when they get to college. The more often students use cannabis, the lower their grades tend to be. The more classes they skip, the less likely they are to still be enrolled. When followed over time, the less likely they are to graduate on time. Number 4 is the impact on substance use on sleep quality and subsequent effects. I work on a college campus, and I'm trying not to show you too many college-based slides, but when we ask students, how are you doing in school? If they're doing well, great. If they're not doing well, they cite things like procrastination, stress, anxiety, depression, and sleep difficulties. Alcohol use is in 34th place. Cannabis use is tied for 36th place with urinary tract infection and concussion or traumatic brain injury. Let's be grateful that we don't have rates of concussion and traumatic brain injury on college campuses like we have rates of past 30-day cannabis use. I've heard people mistakenly say only 1.7% of students have their academics affected by their cannabis use. No, 1.7% of students are actively saying, I use a lot of weed and it's interfering with my school. I think there's a backdoor way, if not front door way, to explain it. If you want to have a perfect night's sleep, it should look like this. REM sleep is rapid eye movement sleep. It's where we do our dreaming. Non-REM are the other stages of sleep, and probably most well known is stage 4 or deep sleep. Sleep experts have made clear REM is overrated. It's not that more REM is better. Instead, you want a night where the pattern is such that time in REM gets longer, time in deep gets less and less. If people use cannabis at night, they'll fall asleep faster. Cannabis has sedative, sedating, and hypnotic, sleep-inducing properties. You can ask people on nights where you use cannabis, what do you notice about your sleep? They will tell you 2 things. 1, they'll say, I sleep hard. I sleep and I mean it. 2, I don't dream. Here's why. Stage 4 or deep sleep gets extended. Why don't they dream? They're literally not entering REM sleep. So that sense of feeling like they're sleeping hard, in quotes, is that extension of stage 4 sleep. Now, who cares? What's the impact of a night of REM-deprived sleep? We see increases the next day in sleepiness, anxiety. There's the irony. What if someone says, I use at night to help me unwind? Irritability, depending on what's going on with a partner, a family member, someone they're dating, an increase in physical jumpiness. All packaged nicely with a quality of sleep that wasn't so hot. If you use multiple nights in a row, these effects are additive or cumulative. If you take a night off, the body plays catch up. All of us have had the next night's sleep, whether you've ever touched a substance in your life or not. Why do I know that? Because lots of things cause REM deprivation, including not sleeping. Sleep deprivation. Think of the last time you were up all night, or you only got an hour or 2 of sleep. The next day, if you could pull it off, you sleep for 9, 10, 12 hours. How do you feel when you wake up? Tired, groggy. It's like, how do you feel tired? You got 12 hours of sleep, because quality different than quantity. I can't graphically show you insomnia any better than right there. A person will slam so fast into deep and immediately into REM. That rapid cycling leads to difficulty both falling and staying asleep. Some people say they can't turn off the running commentary in their head as they're going through this rapid cycle. Some people say they're more tuned into that noise across the street, or they're more actively focusing on the ticking of the clock on the wall. Or really, roommate, breathe louder if you could. Once they get to sleep, too much time in REM, not enough time in the other stages of sleep, increase in fatigue the next day. What does the population I work with, college students, say 3 of the biggest 5 barriers to doing well in school are? Stress, anxiety, and sleep problems. All 3 of those could be made worse by cannabis use at night. They could be flat out caused by cannabis use at night. Number 3, factors associated with health and mental health not already addressed earlier. I see a few things have come in the chat, and especially if they're clarifying, I will check. And Melissa, as moderator, if you've seen things, I invite you to let me know. So, oh, thanks for putting the that link in the chat. Is there evidence that use of cannabis products changes risk of developing other substance use disorders? I will address that at the end. That's something like that's coming up. So I actually had to cut content from this, which is amazing to believe when you see how many slides I actually have. In some ways, I even needed more than the hour we have today. but I tried to pick ones that feel relevant based on what we as prevention professionals can do and what we hear from people. One of those is around birth outcomes. I've increasingly been working with people that are working with pregnant people or people looking to get pregnant, and the conversations about cannabis need to happen, and the science is showing very clearly what needs to be recommended. I was in a conference when this article came out, and people wanted to talk about it instantly. It was by Coleman, Calgar, and colleagues, and they looked at people that use cannabis during pregnancy, tobacco during pregnancy, or both cannabis and tobacco. And they tried to look at, were there pronounced statistically significant differences for any of these groups in outcomes? There were three main findings from this article. There was a significant difference in head circumference, which is a marker of brain development. The group that used both cannabis and tobacco had 5.7 times greater odds of smaller head circumference than the no-use group. Birth defects occurred 3 times greater in the group that used both cannabis and tobacco. And while I'm convinced I must have a typo somewhere, this is not one of them. This is a striking finding. The group that used cannabis during pregnancy, 12 times greater odds of stillbirth or miscarriage compared to the no-use group. The group made clear there are limitations to this study, and future research could look at, and they listed a number of recommendations. One of those is to do what Bailey, Wood, and Shaw did. This article is a game changer. They looked at 531 marijuana-exposed newborns, and then their 531 peers, newborns that were not exposed in utero to cannabis. This slide has way too much going on, and that's on purpose. I don't want anyone thinking I'm putting words in the mouth of these researchers. They looked at 7 main birth outcomes. The mean for non-cannabis exposed is here. The mean for cannabis exposed is here. Odds ratios are here. And if you look to the right, you'll see the p-values. Those of you who are big fans of odds ratios and statistics will quickly go, yikes, all of this is significant. Those of you less familiar with this, I'll explain what they did. In the group of marijuana-exposed newborns, they matched in as many ways as they could a control group. You can see what they matched on: delivery year, the actual hospital, maternal age, if they had insurance or not, other substance use, you name it. They did all they could to control for everything else possible. Quoting verbatim from the researchers, in the current study, marijuana exposure in utero independently predicted poorer birth outcomes across the board, especially indicators such as birth weight and preterm birth that are known to impact longer-term health and development. Effects could not be attributed to other comorbidities, including other drug exposure and sociodemographic risks in this study that involved rigorous matching and biochemical verification of self-report of marijuana and other drug use. Consequently, women should continue to be encouraged to avoid marijuana use during pregnancy. We don't like to hear that people are having a tough time. And when people say, I'm having morning sickness, I feel like cannabis helps with nausea. It needs to be discouraged during pregnancy. And I will show you a science-based article on guidelines for lower risk use, including when recommendations for non-use should be made. When we look at cannabis use and other psychiatric issues, in my eyes, the biggest name in this field is Dr. Wayne Hall at the University of Queensland in Australia. Dr. Hall and his colleague Louise Degenhart showed that we need to do what we can to keep cannabis out of the hands of kids. Those that use cannabis 10 or more times by the age of 18 were 2 to 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia. They went so far as to say that we could make 13% of schizophrenia go away if cannabis use went away. I had the honor of moderating a webinar with Dr. Hall, and I asked him if we could do one thing after legalization in Washington, what should it be? He said, I would screen for cannabis use disorder in your counseling and health centers. Not expecting that answer, I said, what makes you say that? He said, we don't know what comes first, and we don't know what drives what, but we see a terrifying 3-way relationship between depression, cannabis use disorder, and suicide that is so strong that if someone willing to say, I need help with my depression, flags as being cannabis dependent, that person poses a suicide risk that we cannot explain. I asked him, what would you recommend for screening? He said the Cannabis Use Disorder Identification Test Revised, the QDIT-R. The state of Washington and the Washington Recovery Helpline got permission to post this for providers. This will be in your handouts. It starts with a simple yes, no. Have you used any cannabis over the past 6 months? If no, you're done. If yes, there's only 8 items. How to score it is right here. I'm hovering my cursor over it. How to interpret it is right down here. I told him, I'm so struck by what you said. I had no idea. And he said, look at your own country's data. So I looked at the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. This is in a table on page 1,156 of 1,818. You got to know to look for this to find it, right? I don't think most of us stick with this art document past page 30. That's a lot of pages. I made this graph because I feel like graphically it tells such a dramatic story. I fully get this is not causal, but on the left, these are people 18 and older in the US with a past year cannabis use disorder. On the right, people with no past year substance use disorder. Serious thoughts of suicide, 6 times greater. Making a suicide plan, almost 8 times greater. Attempting suicide, over 8 times greater. I hope you never question for a second the value of the work you do around substance use prevention. But when people say, don't we need to do more about suicide prevention? My friend and colleague, Lori Davidson of alcohol said, if you want to be a community that does good suicide prevention, do good alcohol prevention, because alcohol prevention is suicide prevention. And I think I look at findings like this, and we're not that far away when it comes to cannabis. Hey, Melissa, as the moderator, I see someone raise their hand, and I don't know if you've set this up to be able to call on people.
Okay, here, let me see. Let's see who has raised their hand. Here we go. I wish I could. Let me see here. I wasn't sure if you wanted to. Here we go. Allow to talk. Jarnay, did you want to talk? Okay.
I'll keep going. This shouldn't count against my time. I got to get through all these slides. I hear people say, well, you can't overdose on cannabis. That's not true. It looks different than an opiate overdose. It looks different than an alcohol overdose. But there's an acute toxic psychosis. People could hallucinate, see things that aren't there, hear things that aren't there, feel things on them that aren't there, have delusions, including being very, very paranoid, and complete out-of-body stuff, depersonalization. That seems to be more likely when people use too much or when potency is too high. What are we seeing? Potency at never before seen levels. Number 2 is impaired driving. The authors of our legalization initiative said, what if we set driving under the influence at 5 nanograms of THC per milliliter of blood for those over 21 and any positive value for those under 21? Why'd they pick 5 nanograms? It's not the same as being legally intoxicated for alcohol, but you see similar impairment in reaction time and inability to shift focus when there are multiple competing stimuli. The million-dollar question is, well, how long does it take to drop below 5 nanograms? The best published research we have today says people need to wait at least 6 to 8 hours after vaping, smoking, inhaling, 8 to 12 hours after oral ingestion, edibles. When you hear people say, and I quote, I drive better when I'm high, they really, really, really don't. Stores in my state opened in 2014. 1 year later, fatalities with THC present almost doubled. By 2017, we became a state in which drug driving deaths outnumbered drunk driving deaths. That trend has continued through last year. And if a picture's worth 1,000 words, this is a very grim picture. This is not law enforcement. This is not DUIs. This is not a new way of testing. This is the very grim graphing of drivers in my state involved in fatal crashes who are THC positive. Stable, 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 stable. The black line is legalization. Up, 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 up. Number 1 is addiction risk and withdrawal. I hear people say, well, you can't get addicted to weed. That's not true. And what a disservice that does to people struggling with a cannabis use disorder. The terminology has changed. In the old days, we used to talk about substance dependence and substance abuse. When the DSM-5 came out in 2013, right, we bailed on the Roman numerals. Take that, Rome. Rome may have had nothing to do with it, but the terminology changed. We talked about substance use disorder, and in the case of cannabis, cannabis use disorder. I hope none of you mishear me. If you have a friend, a family member, a loved one with a gravely disabling or potentially lethal condition that's had medical cannabis recommended and they're using as recommended, bless that person. That's not who I'm talking about. I really, really worry about the very depressed 18-year-old who says, I'm not going to go to a counseling center. I'm not going to talk to a health center. I've got a medical card. I'm good. I really, really worry about the person that says, I'm going to quit taking all my medications because I don't want to put chemicals in my body. I want to use something natural. I've got a medical card. I had the honor of presenting in Canada the week that they legalized nationwide for non-medical purposes at a conference for college campuses. And as I was preparing my presentation, I saw all these headlines about how, on the one hand, they were opening the floodgates on access to non-medical use, but their medical providers were saying we've got to slow down with medical cannabis. This article is a must-read if this is remotely of interest to you. What's the key to medication? Well, there are several. Do the benefits of the medication outweigh the side effects or consequences? What's the addiction potential? Has the medicine been researched in randomized controlled trials against a control condition, placebo condition? And are there other therapies or treatments that work? You can see in the title, they wanted a simplified guideline. What was their guideline? This flow chart. If someone says, hey, can I get medical marijuana? Can I get a medical marijuana card? Is that what they're asking for? This is a little hard to read. I retyped it over here. If that's what they're asking for, is it for neuropathic pain, palliative and end-of-life pain, chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, or spasticity due to multiple sclerosis or spinal cord injury? If no, we're done. We're not giving it for anxiety. We're not giving it for depression. We're not giving it for headaches. We're not giving it for sleep. How come any possible benefits are so outnumbered by the well-documented side effects and consequences? It's a very addictive substance with very real withdrawal. The science isn't there for its use with those issues. And for those of you who do therapy or counseling, thank you. And therapy works. Counseling works. We have treatments that work. Only if yes, has the person tried traditional therapies first? If no, try them first. Only if yes, consider a medical cannabinoid as an adjunct, but they say heads up, people shouldn't smoke their medicine. If at this stage in the presentation, you're thinking to yourself, wow, this Jason Kilmer has some strong stylus skills, you would be right. The first time my stylus shot on my laptop, I was like, I broke my computer. My friend said, no, that's a stylus. I said, I don't know what that is. She said, you can use it to draw stuff. So now I just can't be stopped. So I drew this Sasquatch. That's my favorite animal here in Washington. Look, there's one on the wall. My favorite animal all the time, I drew this T-Rex. I've been watching a lot of Disney Plus, so I drew Grogu and then Din Djarin, and I put them all together into one majestic picture because this is the way. I really need a hobby, everybody. People say, but what about CBD? That works, right? That reduces anxiety. That's a research question. The problem is if someone says, oh, you're anxious, take this, it'll help. It'll probably help. Expectancies. This brilliant study by Arndt and DeWitt, people were their own control group. They signed consent forms and said, I agree to take something that could include CBD. It was a double-blind experiment, meaning they eliminated expectancies. There were 4 conditions: sugar pill, 300 milligrams of CBD orally, 600 milligrams, and a stunning 900 milligrams of CBD orally. People would take something on 4 separate occasions, counterbalanced over time, and then they went through tasks that induced unwanted mood or affect. They got them upset. They got them stressed. When you don't tell people what they're getting, what did CBD do? Nothing. I hope none of you mishear me. I'm not saying CBD does nothing, period. Allen and colleagues showed 4 domains where cannabinoids could be an adjunct to treatment. But quoting verbatim, oral CBD does not alter response to emotional stimuli or produce anxiolytic. What does that mean? Anxiety-reducing-like effects in healthy human subjects. Finally, my favorite article of 2022 was Jody Gilman at Harvard, who did the study we've all been waiting for. You don't need a medical card to buy cannabis in my state if you have cash and an ID that shows you're over 21. But if you have a medical card, there are tax exemptions, fee breaks, it's cheaper. She looked at people that asked for a medical card and got it immediately, or were put in a 12-week waitlist control group. The group that got the card immediately, probably not surprisingly, increased their frequency of cannabis use. But guess what else increased? They got addicted. The incidence of cannabis use disorder went up compared to the control group. And yet another picture worth 1,000 words. Look at this. What got worse? Cannabis use disorder symptoms. What got better? People said they fall asleep faster. We talked about that. Onset of sleep is more rapid. Big picture, quality of sleep gets affected. But look at what didn't change. Quoting verbatim, there were no observed benefits of obtaining a medical marijuana card for pain, anxiety, or depressive symptoms. They said those with affective disorders have almost 4 times higher odds of meeting criteria for cannabis use disorder, meaning a medical card may be a high risk or even be contraindicated for people with mood disorders. Why is that so important to replicate? Depression is the 3rd most common reason that people seek a medical card. Therapy works, counseling works, treatment works. We need to get that word out there. especially because of so many claims being made about products where the science is not supporting those claims. And finally, I worry about how many people report, well, I have to use cannabis because I know it helps. It helps my blank. And what they're just describing is withdrawal. My friend and colleague, Dr. Christine Lee, asked incoming first-year students, tell us why you use cannabis. And they said lots of things. I like getting high. I like the feeling. It gives me something to do with my friends. It helps when I'm bored. Makes things more fun. Music sounds better. It's cool. It helps me celebrate. But they also said it helps me relax, helps me sleep, helps me cope when I'm depressed, relieves stress, helps when my appetite sucks, reduces anxiety, alleviates physical pain, helps when I have a headache. Is cannabis addictive? Yes. Are there even criteria for cannabis withdrawal? Also, yes. What are those criteria? Keeping this list in mind, it's the same list. Anxiety, sleep difficulty, depressed appetite, decreased appetite, depressed mood, and headaches. If someone says, I think that guy's wrong, I hear that a lot. If someone says, I think that guy's wrong, I know it helps my anxiety. Ask them, how do you know? If they say, well, I use weed every day, and last week I ran out for 2 or 3 days, my anxiety was brutal. I felt like hell. I couldn't sleep, got my hands on weed again, and everything got better. See, it helps. I hope what's clear is that's not cannabis helping your anxiety. That's resuming daily substance use, making withdrawal symptoms stop. And that's an instance of managing addiction, managing withdrawal, more than managing underlying anxiety. I mentioned 50 slides ago, some students with ADHD say, but I have to use because when I don't use, I can't sit still. Look at criteria number 5, restlessness. That's withdrawal. So I tried to make sure we had time for questions. And so what are the opportunities and implications for prevention? I wanted to make 10 suggestions, but in the interest of time and due to budget cuts, I'll only make 7 suggestions. Budget cut jokes are always hilarious to me as a state employee. Number 1, a mix of strategies is best. This is not on us solely as prevention. In college, we have the college alcohol intervention matrix. I'm not going to try and force this on you. What I want you to know is it reviews over 60 individually focused and environmentally focused strategies. And in my eyes, the most important part of that document is this statement. They say your best chance for creating a safer campus could come from a combination of individual and environmental level interventions that work together to maximize positive effects. Yes, yes, yes. Prevention is part of that mix, but that mix includes and is not limited to policies, but then enforcement of those policies, education, prevention, intervention, treatment, and recovery support. We have tag team partners in this. And there's a quote I've been citing for years that feels different now after what we've dealt with the pandemic. But they say, what do you do when you have evidence-based strategies? How do you get them in people's hands? The use of effective interventions on a scale sufficient to benefit society requires careful attention to implementation strategies as well. One without the other is like serum without a syringe. The cure is available, the delivery system is not. My friends, we have to find out where the delivery systems are. You could have the greatest program ever as a brief intervention for mandated people after a law violation, a policy violation. But if you don't have consistent enforcement of policy, your program, the cure, is available, the delivery system is not. The number one reason people who are dealing with depression and feel like they need help don't get help is they don't know where to go. We can fix that. Therapy works, counseling works, the cure is available, the delivery system is not. So I think part of the challenge is know that there's a mix of strategies. Prevention's a part of that, and consider our different delivery strategies. Number 2, consider screening in health or counseling centers, and even go a step further with screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment, SBIRT, since motivational enhancement-based brief interventions show promise. Screening is, no matter what people come in for, they get screened. Brief interventions, we do a lot of training around Bill Miller and Steve Rolnick's motivational interviewing. They're brief interventions to raise awareness, prompt consideration, or even commitment to change. Referral to treatment is for people that maybe need more than a brief intervention. I was co-author in a study that showed that in-person, personalized feedback interventions using motivational interviewing show reductions in cannabis use, time spent high, and even consequences. Number 3, if you're considering harm reduction approaches, I've been around harm reduction approaches my whole career. Be aware of recommendations for lower risk use rather than low risk use. This article, there's another must read. This is Planet Earth's who's who of cannabis researchers. And I'll draw your attention to the title. It doesn't say low risk guidelines. It says lower risk guidelines. How come? They say if you look at the science, There is no safe level of cannabis use. When people say, hey, prevention specialist, can you present on how to use weed safely? We really can't. And that's not us being scare tacticy. It's that the science says there is no safe level. The only reliable way to avoid any risk of harm is to abstain from use. So what else do they recommend? If people make the choice to use low potency products where possible. They said there's no one safe route of use. Every route brings its own risks. That said, smoking is without question the most risky. If people insist on using it, it's finding a method of use other than smoking. Keep use occasional. How do they define that? A day or two a week, weekend only. Our job on college campuses got a lot easier with that fourth one. They say if you notice the cognitive stuff, stop. If stopping's not realistic, substantially reduce frequency and potency. And there's the recommendation to avoid driving 6 to 8 hours after inhaling, 8 to 12 hours after oral ingestion. One of you asked in the Q&A about breastfeeding, and I held off on answering that because I knew this was coming. They said it is prudent for people who intend to procreate and for women who are pregnant or breastfeeding to abstain. That's the recommendation. To abstain from cannabis use toward reducing possible risk for reproduction and of health harm to offspring, respectively. There was another question about risk for other substance use disorders, and I'll show you recommendation 11. They said there are some people that might want to consider abstaining outright or at least significantly adjusting their use. Who's that? People with a first-degree family history of, or who are actively dealing with, a psychotic disorder, a mood disorder, or a substance use disorder. The risk factors for other substance use disorders, there is something going on there, and that's reflected in their recommendation. Number 4, look at event-specific opportunities for prevention, education, and enforcement of policies. 420 is officially a thing. April 20th, more people compared to weekdays or weekends use on 420. There's more unique sessions of use. There's a larger amount used. And sadly, the risk of a fatal crash goes up on 420 from 4:20 p.m. to midnight compared to April 13th or April 27th over a 25-year window. What's the not so good news? That can be devastating to a community. What's the better news? We literally know when that is. Like heads up, we got 7 weeks, little over 7 weeks to plan for 420, which is on a Saturday this year. This article came out April 18th, 2018. We didn't have time to do anything with it. By 420, 2019, law enforcement said, we believe the data. We partnered with, we had people at our Washington Healthy Youth Coalition meeting, practitioners and prevention professionals sitting next to law enforcement. And they said, we're going to do DUI patrols for cannabis. They got almost 3 dozen drivers off the road who otherwise probably would not have been identified. You can do something about that. Number 5, correct misperceived norms. Most people aren't using. Most people aren't driving under the influence. The more people use, the more they think others are using. You can do that in personalized normative feedback, personalized feedback interventions, social norms campaigns. We use our data from our Young Adult Health Survey and provide it to Mike Graham-Squire and his team at Neighborhood House. They've got such promising data on the impact of this campaign, Most Steer Clear, that shows that most young adults aren't using. It shows most young adults aren't driving after use. And it builds in the psychoeducation around how long people should be waiting after use. Number 6, look at what we've done during this very quick 47 minutes. There's a lot of science out there. Get the risks out there. Support prevention and intervention efforts that could impact motivation to change. I'll end by saying parents, caregivers, guardians, community members, they are very much our tag team partners in all of this. At least on college campuses, the name in parent-based interventions is at Penn State, Dr. Rob Teresi. There's lots of different tools, and I'll try and talk with you about these now. I'm going to show you one slide about alcohol. Annie Fairley, who I work with at the University of Washington, collected data right before students started college, the end of their first year of college and the end of their second year of college. And she wanted to predict, in quotes, binge drinking, 5 drinks in a row for males, 4 drinks in a row for females, as a function of social modeling, close friends who drink heavily, perceived friend approval of drinking and getting drunk, and then parental permissiveness. Do I think a parent, caregiver, or guardian is cool with me drinking and getting drunk? Want to see a perfect figure? Because data never turn out this way. Look at this. On the y-axis is number of binge drinking episodes. On the x-axis is time. What's the top line? High social modeling, high parental permissiveness. Next line down, high social modeling, low parental permissiveness. Do you realize this means messaging from parents alters the college experience of students that go to a high-risk friend group a high-risk setting like a fraternity or sorority, or even a campus with a reputation for partying. Next line down, low social modeling, high permissiveness. Next line down, low social modeling, low parental permissiveness. This is sophomores in high school in my state, 10th graders. Hey kids, do you think your parents think it's wrong for you to use or not wrong? When kids say, I think my parents would think it's wrong for me to use marijuana, 13% have nevertheless used in the past 30 days. When kids say, my parents don't care, 59% have used. Kids who think the community doesn't care, more than double. If you have data that show 99% of people in our community want to see kids stay substance free, get that out there. The kids are listening. That will matter. When kids live with someone that uses, their likelihood of using 6 or more days in the past 30, 3.5 times greater than when people live with someone that doesn't use. In our young adult health survey, 18, 19, and 20-year-olds who use cannabis in the past 30 days, we asked them, where do you get it? We've seen a significant decrease in getting it from friends and from getting it someone with a medical card. You can see why outlets closed between 2015 and 2016 in my state. We've seen a significant increase in giving money to someone to get it for them, stealing it. We saw the first non-zero numbers during the pandemic, but look at what's going up. People getting it from parents with their permission. I don't know if parents are operating off of the old script of, quote, I used when I was younger and I turned out fine. I don't know if they're unaware of the health consequences, the academic outcomes. We can get them on board. You undoubtedly have your own local resources. Whenever you can play on the internet at work and let it count as a day of work, let's be honest, that's a really good day. So I would encourage you to play on starttalkingnow.org. Here in Washington, available in 37 languages. Learn about cannabiswa.org with a guide, 3 different things you can do with and for parents. I'm a big fan, if you're working with parents of college-age students, collegeparentsmatter.org. From Maryland, you click on topic, you go to cannabis, and it's to choose your own adventure of, I don't know if my kid's using, my kid uses, but I don't know how much or how often, or my kid uses regularly. And they make clear, do not be afraid to talk about this. You're allowed to disapprove and banish any fear that your disapproval is naive. Again, look at this webinar. Focus on one message, know the norms. If a kid says, well, everyone uses, they really don't. Make communication a regular activity and recognize the power of your influence. I am married to a 6th grade teacher. I could not do what she does. Like 6th graders freak me out. And she was grading an assignment that to me illustrated the power of parental influence. And I said, can I take a picture of this? She's like, well, don't put the kid's name on there. I love this so much. I was in high school from 1983 to 1987. So first, I have amazing taste in music. And second, I appreciate all references to 80s music. The assignment, it was a blank map of the world. And the assignment was label every continent and ocean. And one of the kids in her class labeled Africa as Africa by Toto, which is, of course, the song about blessing the rains down in Africa by the band that also sings the great song Rosanna. Whew, I wanted to leave 5 minutes for questions. We did that. I will again thank Dr. Welsh. Big thank you to Melissa. There's my Sasquatch, and I drew a Penn State Nittany Lion because, again, I really need a hobby. But my email address is jkilmer@uw.edu. I work at the Center for the Study of Health and Risk Behaviors. We're on Twitter. If you want to follow us, we'd be thrilled. If you want to tweet anything about today, we'd be so excited and up to the challenge to try and figure out how to retweet it. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. And with the time we have left, see what questions people have, see what I can clarify for people.
Wow, that was wonderful. I mean, I feel like
Thank
I
you.
learned so much. I mean, and it's great to see that there's actually so much research and evidence out there about this, because I feel like we're constantly looking for that. So I really appreciate everything that you shared. And we have a couple of questions here.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for monitoring the chat. I realized I couldn't take questions.
Well, I was trying to wait till the end because I didn't want to interrupt you, but maybe they would have been better at the time. I don't know. But here we go. In the sales graph, how were the sales measured? By counting sales or the dollar amount? I wonder
Yeah,
if
no,
some
it's
of the effect
counting
is the greater proportion of sales being high potency is more expensive. It's not a criticism. It just says it's just an
Yeah,
understanding.
no, it was only flour, remember? And it was right when stores opened. So we didn't even have dabs and all that stuff until later. It was all sale data furnished to the Liquor and Cannabis Board, which regulates sales in Washington. So it was total tax inclusive sales. And that could not be explained by variety of product.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
So are babies now showing effects at birth when the father, not the mother?
Good
Or
research question. I don't know the answer to that.
I don't
And I
know.
mean,
Okay.
obviously for ethical reasons, you can't force scenarios like that. They have to happen in real world ways, which is why in some ways it's even stunning that we have the articles that we have from the authors that have done this work. But I think it's a cool research question.
Great. And what about the DUI with marijuana in states where it is legal?
Yeah. I mean, we don't have breathalyzers for cannabis like we do for alcohol. If an officer believes someone's under the influence, they're arrested under suspicion of DUI. They're taken
Okay.
to a hospital for a blood draw. If the blood draw comes back at any positive number for people under 21, it's a per se, meaning no questions asked, it's a DUI. If they're over 5 nanograms and they're over 21, it's a DUI.
Okay. Wow. Great.
I
So
saw a
will
question about withdrawal. It depends on how much people use, how often, for how long, and how potent. Usually peak is hit within 3 to 7 days. And by day 21, withdrawal's done.
Oh, okay, great. I did see that one here. Okay, great. And you'll be able to send us the slides for
Right, I
everybody's
mentioned it at the
very
beginning. And sorry
interested
for
in the
people that,
slides.
yeah. Sorry if people came in late and missed that. But I'm going to send, second we get off Zoom, I'm going to send you the handouts.
Okay, the delayed and longer term impact on driving and other behaviors is worrisome.
Yeah,
I think it would be harder for a person to connect their use with the fact that they should not be driving for 4 to 8 hours later.
right. 6 to 8, remember, and then
Six to
8 to
eight.
12 of oral. I think that one of our proverbial foot in the doors that we have is bystanders. People, if you see someone that's had too much to drink, what have we learned? Don't let them drink and drive. Call them a ride share. Get their keys. We need people to be doing the same thing with cannabis. And when you see people using in vehicles, it's like, come on. I mean, they're actively using something that's causing impairment.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'm dropping in the survey again into the chat. And then here, let's see, we did have. So how can pharmaceutical trials be conducted ethically, but research on cannabis use cannot be conducted similarly?
Outside the US. It's
Okay.
all the research being done outside the US. In the United States, cannabis is a Schedule I drug, meaning there are no medically indicated uses. So we look outside the US, and there's been some incredible research done. Um, Again, it was fascinating being in Canada the week that they were legalizing nationwide to see that they were opening access to non-medical use, but saying we've got to slow down on medical. And here's all the medical research as to why.
And can that be changed to allow for better research?
But that conversation's happening as we speak. People have
Okay,
been
good.
lobbying for, could you make it Schedule II? Could you make it Schedule III? I mean, what's hard is that, again, especially I saw one of you write in the chat that it's being recommended for anxiety.
Yeah.
The science is showing it's making it worse, if not causing it. And so um, I presented to a group of 11th graders. Here's another tip: never work with 11th graders, is what I've learned over the years. But they asked, they're like, if it's so bad, why is it a medicine? I mean, because people voted for it to be. It's not like medicine said, hey, everybody, let's make this available for this issue. And so I think that's something that, especially with kids, what do you do when you're sick? You use a medicine. And I think that, again, letting there be a mouthpiece for counseling, letting there be a mouthpiece for other coping strategies becomes really important.
Okay, great. And a lot of us are in the field that we work with younger kids, and I really appreciate what you're doing with college students, especially since they seem to be ones that are using it the most. But do you know of any prevention presentations like that shares this kind of information with youth in schools or community settings?
I mean, there are programs that are bigger and they are like year long that have an impact. Gil Botvin's life skills
Yeah.
program. It's not just about cannabis, but it's about all these other things. One of the challenges we have, and I know the data related to college students best, is that if we give people facts and information, they learn stuff, but they don't change their behavior. Maybe we need to increase knowledge. Maybe we need to increase information. Maybe if learning about these risks is an acceptable outcome at this point. And so I do think that norms are a big part of it. I made reference to Dr. Jeff Linkenbach earlier, his positive community norms approach. When kids know most people aren't using, they're going to feel empowered to refuse offers to use. When kids know most people aren't using, those that do feel more empowered to consider stopping if they know they won't be the only ones. As far as content that's appropriate for kids, I mean, I've presented to middle schools and high schools before. I joke about being afraid of 11th graders, but I am afraid of sixth grade. And I've often asked someone from the school to be there with me. So if I give an answer that's not middle school appropriate, someone can fix my mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is really, I wrote down about the norms, about how important that is. I work with a lot of um, other substance use, including marijuana, and just to know that most kids are not using is really,
Right.
really, yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. So are
These
there
comments in the chat are so nice. I've had a really rough week. I needed that. So I appreciate it. I hope none of you question for a second the value of the work that you do. And I wish you all a boring and uneventful end to the 2023-2024 academic year. So thank you for the chance to work with you today. Melissa, I'll let you get us over the finish line.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We will definitely share for everyone that attended. We will share the presentation slides and we will get the recording out as well. So thank you all, and we will have a good rest of the day. Thanks again, Dr. Kilmer.
You can call me Jason. You're welcome.
Okay, Jason.
Bye, everybody.